Now on Chronicle.
The first thing that crosses my mind, I won't bleed to death.
American heroes
I'm fighting for my country.
sharing their stories of bravery
All I felt was that heat and that shrapnel on my back.
and sacrifice.
Constant. That's all they're doing is just shooting at you.
I thought I was dead.
Men and women answering the call to service.
She always made us proud of her.
And America's just the greatest place in the world.
Now on Chronicle, the cost of freedom.
Hello and welcome to Chronicle. I'm Jane Robelo. The cost of freedom. What do those words really mean? Remembering our patriots and service members is so important that we erect memorials like this one in Cleveland Park. Visual reminders that freedom comes at a cost. And for generations, families in this great nation of ours, including the Carolinas, have paid the price. Some more than others. We begin tonight with Tim Waller.
We have always served.
Yeah, right here, this is the Purple Heart.
91-year-old Jack Durham is among the oldest still living to remind us of the sacrifice.
I thought, man, this is a dream. I'm just having a nightmare. I'm going back to sleep. I wake up, I'm going to be in my bunk.
He was lucky in one sense. The war in Europe had just ended. Hitler and his Nazi regime were no more. Durham's job was to help deliver fuel to the many army vehicles that were spread across France once the fighting stopped.
I remember exactly that moment. Never forget it. Never forget it.
The 20-year-old soldier, who was a world away from Pickens, was walking through a field that had been cleared of mines, or so he thought.
It's not like a gunshot, like that. I mean, like explosion going. It's a lot different from a gunshot, you know.
When Durham woke up, he was lying in a crater that wasn't there just a few seconds before. And there was something else.
And I looked over to my left, and there lay my leg. And it had a brand new shoe on it. I hadn't worn it long, and I wanted that shoe. I don't know why I won't get that new shoe.
With that one step, Durham paid a hefty price, the kind that earned him a Purple Heart.
You've seen it. It's happened. There's no way of deleting it.
Like many soldiers, David Gerardo was moved by the events of 9/11. And while helping topple Saddam Hussein's regime in Operation Iraqi Freedom, he witnessed unimaginable horrors.
Sitting there driving down the road and all you're hearing is ding, 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 ding. I mean, just constant. That's all they're doing is just shooting at you.
10 men in Gerardo's battalion were killed in and around the Iraqi capital, including his mentor, Sergeant Gary Willett, who died when an improvised explosive leveled his vehicle.
I remember the explosion like it was, I mean, it's still vivid, the sound of it, you know. Come on.
Gerardo's service dog,
Free. Willett.
that helps calm the PTSD from which he has suffered since his return,
Cover me.
is named Willett after Gerardo's sergeant.
I'm Jack Durham. How you
David
doing?
Gerardo, nice to meet you.
The wars Jack Durham and David Gerardo served in were more than 60 years apart.
Do you ever have powdered eggs?
I think I've had powdered eggs probably more than I've had real eggs.
And as different as they were also the same.
I had it easy compared to what you did.
Lives lost, sacrifices made.
I'm humbled to have a hot shower. You know, humbled to wake up and see my kids in the bed, you know. And
I've been to a lot of other countries, but nothing compares with this country at all.
A message spanning generations of warriors.
And America's just the greatest place in the world.
Patriotic pride is strong now, but go back a little more than 100 years and you'll find a much different story. Imagine a time when people in the upstate didn't even celebrate the 4th of July. It turns out World War I had as much of an impact on our area as our area had on the war itself. Mike McCormick takes us on a journey from training to triumph.
Here you see a picture of my great-grandfather.
Gene Gallivan's past became a big part of Greenville's future.
He was quoted in the Greenville News at one time as being a hound for money.
He says his great-grandfather founded the Gallivan Building Company and helped build Camp Sevier, a World War I training camp encompassing Greenville and the Taylors area. Take a miles-long march up Highway 29, and you'll find a search for sales on land where men once searched for skills. Westgate Mall is here now, but in 1917, another training area called Camp Wadsworth is what brought people to this same spot in Spartanburg. The government put the World War I training camps in the South for two reasons. One, anticipated warm weather, but the soldiers slept in tents during what turned out to be the coldest winter on record.
There were days when the high temperature was 10 degrees.
Frida Davison, dean of the library at USC Upstate, says strategy was the other reason.
It was only 50 years after the Civil War, and having them serve as training camps for Yankees was a way to start mending those fences.
She says the Harlem Hellfighters and African American infantry were among the soldiers at Camp Wadsworth.
They were a ferocious group.
The soldiers training in Spartanburg found a point of peace at the Episcopal Church of the Advent.
I think Dr. Pendleton baptized scores of those who sang in choirs here, who participated in the services.
Mickey Pierce, a member of the church's archives committee, says Dr. Pendleton, the rector at the time, knew the war secretary, and that relationship is the reason Camp Wadsworth came to Spartanburg.
Well, it blows me away. I mean, it's just incredible.
Pierce says the tall candlesticks on the altar came from the camp's chapel. The soldiers gave the church this glowing gift of gratitude, and the parents of one soldier donated this hymn board in memory of their son.
Many of these guys didn't come home.
Courtney Tollison-Hartness, an assistant professor of history at Furman, says freedom wasn't the only gift the men gave to our area.
There was an economic boom here.
Eugenia Duke fed the soldiers at Camp Sevier. Her mayonnaise became the mortar that held the building blocks of a big business together.
There's a tale that she sold 10,000 sandwiches in one day.
The camps fed major improvements like new roads in both cities.
Camp Sevier had electricity and also telegraph lines, and this was rare.
Patriotic pride was also rare at the time.
For decades after the Civil War, white Greenvillians did not celebrate the 4th of July. It was considered a Yankee holiday or a holiday for African Americans.
But Tollison-Hartness says the tradition of star-spangled celebrations we know now started once the U.S. joined World War I. So the camps were a spark that ignited big benefits for this area, the war, and Gene Gallivan's family.
When you look at what he was able to accomplish, it really set a foundation for both his children and his grandchildren to live and be successful in this town.
A Buffalo soldier fights a war abroad and at home. Coming up next on Chronicle.
Buffalo soldiers. Those are what Native Americans called black members of the U.S. Cavalry in the 1800s, and the name followed African American military troops into World War II, where an upstate man was part of the Army's 92nd Infantry Division. Here now is Jeff Hart.
December 7th, 1941.
And I was in the kitchen and it came over the radio. The Japanese have bombed Pearl Harbor. I didn't know what Pearl Harbor was.
DeWitt Jackson, a Fountain Inn native, was soon to be drafted. This is him, December 1942, fresh out of basic training.
We were ready to fight. Yeah, I wanted to go fight.
But in the era of segregation, the focus was more on the color of a man's skin than the uniform he was wearing.
I'm fighting along for America with Americans, and yet some Americans would come up and insult you,
Jackson was shipped off to Europe, fighting with the Army's 92nd Infantry Division, black soldiers under the direction of white officers. November 1944, facing his first day of combat in the mountains of Italy, he lost a friend before he'd ever fired a shot.
Machine gun hit him, cut him loose hand, so he fell right back on my left shoulder. And he was in pain. He said, "Mama, mama, mama."
The Buffalo soldiers made progress in early February of 1945.
I just didn't think I could get killed. I had so much confidence,
But as they moved into a small Italian village, he triggered a landmine.
I had 23 shrapnel wounds on this right side and a concussion right eardrum. So the war was over for me.
Soon after, World War II ended. Jackson recovered abroad before returning to the U.S., hopeful the liberties he fought for overseas would be extended to him back home.
And really, it was worse. Segregation became worse after the war.
Following his discharge, he got on a bus in Fayetteville, North Carolina.
I got about midway, sat down, wasn't thinking about anything but coming home to my mother.
The driver spotted him in the middle of the bus
He said, you have to get in the back of the bus.
and accused him of wearing fake war medals.
I said, hell no, I got them on the battlefield.
Now 70 years later, 2 marriages, 18 children, there's not a hint of bitterness in DeWitt Jackson.
Sometimes it's scary now when I look back on a reflection, you know. I said, good Lord, how did I get through that?
The Buffalo Soldiers in World War II disproved skeptics. They captured nearly 24,000 prisoners and received 12,000 decorations and citations for gallantry and combat. And in 1948, President Harry Truman ended segregation in the U.S. military.
The sacrifice of heroes.
Here in Greenville, South Carolina, it was a personal tragedy.
And the legacy they leave behind when Chronicle continues.
For more than 50 years, people have strolled past this RF-86 jet in the heart of Greenville's Cleveland Park, never realizing that it stands in tribute to a native son who likely prevented a nuclear World War III, Major Rudolph Anderson, Jr.
This was a national event and an international event. It was a crisis of that proportion, but it had a connection back in Greenville.
In the fall of 1962, the United States and the Soviet Union were on the brink of nuclear war. The Soviets were believed to be moving nuclear missiles onto the newly communist island nation of Cuba, just 90 miles off the Florida coast.
The Cold War was about to become a hot war, a real war, and people were scared.
We had a big part to play in showing the world what was happening.
The U.S. Air Force's high-flying U-2 spy planes gave President John F. Kennedy photographic evidence that Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev had the missiles.
The U-2s were basically our only serious source of intelligence on these missiles going in and staying in and what they were.
And one of the top U-2 pilots was the upstate's own Major Rudolph Anderson, Jr.
He always loved flying. He loved airplanes. He was just fascinated with them all of his life.
After graduating from Clemson University in 1948 as part of the very first Air Force ROTC, Rudy Anderson quickly became one of the top pilots in the Air Force.
He's a professional in every sense of the word. Great U-2 pilot. None better.
And brave. 10 days into the Cuban Missile Crisis, a U-2 was fired on. The secrecy of the missions had ended. Nevertheless, 2 days later, President Kennedy ordered one more flight, and Major Anderson stepped up for the mission.
Forces on the ground in Cuba, acting without orders from Nikita Khrushchev, fired 2 SAMs, 2 surface-to-air missiles.
While the whole world was watching and the whole country was watching with such great tension, here in Greenville, South Carolina, it was a personal tragedy.
Major Anderson was shot down on the Saturday at a time when Khrushchev and Kennedy were deciding what to do next. When Khrushchev saw that Kennedy behaved with restraint, did not retaliate, that's what gave the final impetus to the 2 sides making a secret deal, which they did the next day.
On October 28th, day 13, the Cuban Missile Crisis ends with 1 combat casualty.
He called his mother the night before his mission, and he said, "Do not worry about me, because I am doing what I love."
Major Anderson was posthumously awarded the very first Air Force Cross. His body was returned to Greenville for burial at Woodlawn Memorial Cemetery. The monument to Major Anderson was dedicated in Cleveland Park in 1963, just less than a year after our native son was shot down. And 50 years later, in 2012, the city of Greenville unveiled an updated monument.
And that's something that everyone should reflect on. His life was given, but our lives, we lived on, and our freedom was maintained.
So much has changed since the Cuban Missile Crisis. Technology, what children have to learn, is so different now. But some things remain the same. Old helicopters still fly, and honor always stands tall. Here now is Michael Cogdill.
It'll look inspiring.
Andy gave a lady's name to a flying machine because the lady so loved to fly.
Everything about her was the kind of thing that you'd want from any child you would ever have.
This old warbird in pieces will carry the name Kimberly.
Kimberly is an only child from Easley, South Carolina.
In a hangar in Colombia, Kimberly, the Cobra combat chopper, 41 years old this year, is getting a makeover, fit for a soldier.
She was a great student.
And her legacy will soon get a new debut.
And then she wants to go off and be a combat helicopter pilot. Who would have thought that?
Andy Burley flew combat.
I got 680 combat hours.
In Vietnam.
I didn't want to walk in Vietnam, so I took the test to fly.
Now he and some fellow vets nurture and love some of the old choppers like this one back to life. YouTube shows how they fly them around to teach school kids that helicopters happen because of science and math, and that honor comes easy to no one.
There are opportunities out there, but they're not going to be given to you. You're going to have to earn them.
Soon this Kimberly will fly off to teach children the honors earned by this one in Fallujah, Iraq, just about 13 years ago.
She was a captain in the United States Army. She was the commander of the unit. This is extraordinary.
Captain Kimberly Hampton was shot down flying an Army chopper. The star graduate of Presbyterian College lost her life, but not her reputation.
You have to earn respect. You can't demand respect, and that's the kind of commander Kimberly was.
Andy named that chopper Kimberly to help her memory rise to meet generations to come.
If we are remembered, we will never die, and that's important.
Kimberly's mom and dad know that well.
She always made us proud of her, and we tried to make her proud of us now in what we do.
In that Cobra chopper named for their daughter, Ann and Dale Hampton already see an immortality of what she believed.
Anything you want to do is within reach if you'll work for it and try.
The guns of the old Cobra will fly empty, but with the aim of a soldier, ever true.
I will feel her presence, that's for sure. She'll be there.
A veteran's path to healing through the power of a pen. Coming up next on Chronicle.
On September 11th, 2001, Brennan Beck watched on television as our country was attacked. And from there, in his high school classroom, he made a vow. 5 days after graduation, he joined the Army. And during his first deployment, 14 in his company were killed. Mandy Gaither now with this soldier's unlikely path to healing.
Words, letters, jumbled together with the power to bring pride, the capacity to carry pain.
Gunshots, shrapnel, a broken bone.
Brennan Beck's words convey both.
I didn't use ink, I used bullets. I didn't write, I killed.
The most painful chapter of this soldier's story wasn't always this easy to tell.
I remember at one point lying in the dark on my couch in my living room and just crying.
After an honorable discharge at age 22, this decorated hero with a Purple Heart and Bronze Star with Valor was as low as he could go. Medals don't matter much when something all too precious is lost. Beck and his closest friend Ross McGinnis were 19 years old when sent to Iraq. 1 month into his deployment, in a convoy, an explosion, followed by the words Beck can't ever stop hearing.
We've got mass casualty situation. We need to go, 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 go. And the whole time I was just, remember praying as I'm driving back, just praying like, God, don't let it be Ross McGinnis. He's my best friend. I can't lose him. Don't let it be Ross.
Ross McGinnis fell onto a grenade that day. In death came the nation's highest decoration, the Medal of Honor. His sacrifice saved 4 others, but crushed this soldier. That pain pushed down, not dealt with. 3 months later, another explosion.
All I felt was that heat and that shrapnel on my back, and I thought I was dead. I thought, that's it. I'm done.
The wounds on Beck's body would heal. The ones inside ripped open once again. Alberto Garcia Jr., another friend, killed.
Almost felt like God had it out for me for some reason.
Beck soldiered on through another tour in Iraq. When he came back home, the war within him raged on. Diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, nightmares every single night, his mind always back on the battlefield. The only thing more powerful than the pain, he found in a pen.
Larger than war.
His words stopped the silent suffering. Writing paved a way out of the darkness. The path led him to Clemson University.
You can take any class.
Beck became the first full-time employee to work with student veterans. 2 years ago, he saw a need and aimed to fill it.
10 minutes on the clock.
Starting Clemson's first writing group for veterans of all ages.
We lost a lot of great soldiers.
We had to sleep in flooded rice paddies.
Different generations, different stories, bonded by the same sentiment. As the sentences seep onto the paper, their stories no longer are trapped inside. A way to cope even through the loss of a best friend.
I woke up in Baghdad, Iraq. He woke up in the kingdom of God. Maybe he did get a good deal after all.
Within these words, these veterans find laughter and at times tears. But they possess something all too unexpected, the power to heal.
For nearly 250 years, Americans have answered the call of service. Many times that call comes at a cost. Lives lost, families broken, our warriors wounded. But Americans have never turned their backs when called to serve. To the men and women in uniform, the past, the present, and the future, we thank you. May we never forget the sacrifices that you make for our great nation. And thank you for joining us for Chronicle, The Cost of Freedom. I'm Jane Robelo.